So here we're going to look at how to put a works cited together for some of the common types of sources that we'll probably run into. Most obviously, material from our textbook here. And truth be told, whether you're working from a print edition or an e-text, the formatting is really not going to change a whole bunch. So we're going to toggle between a couple of different screens here. We're going to actually open up our e-text as it appears on my web browser here. So I've already signed in, and then I'm going to open our ebook. So we'll come back to that in a second. And we're also going to be, for a little while, at the COD library page, the citing sources area, and we're concerned with MLA. So it's useful to take actually a quick look at how MLA citation style is now built. So the idea behind MLA is not that they as an organization will provide every possible form of book or article or video or audio piece or art installation or anything under the sun and give you the exact MLA style, the way to format that. That was kind of their approach earlier on, decades ago. But obviously the sheer number of and diversity of types of sources that exist out there has made it almost impossible for them to keep up. And so what they're trying to do is make it possible for people to kind of build their own citation based on a few basic categories that are hopefully going to be common across almost any kind of source. The good news here is that once you learn those basics, there might be some form of media that develops in the next 5 or 10 years or whatever it might be. And while MLA style hasn't given us an example for that, because that's not really what they're in the business of anymore, we've laid out this sort of process or this framework so that even if something new develops, we can still create a good works cited citation for it. So the basic pieces that we're going to want to put together include things that are probably pretty common or pretty recognizable. So the author of the source, which could be an individual, like the author of a short story, but it could also be like a corporate or group authorship as well. The title of the source, like if it's an article or again a short story or a play. The title of the container, which is kind of a new word that they're using now, but it's a catch-all for wherever this source is housed, whether it might be a database or a book like an anthology that has a bunch of different chapters by different authors, or like our book, of course, that has multiple stories and poems and dramatic works by different authors. So we would probably have a fairly conventional author, right, named for things that are coming from our textbook. The title of the source would just be the title of the short story or the poem or the play, and the title of the container is the title of our textbook. And that's where we might have to go back to this information to get some of that fuller title editor information. So let's keep going though. Other contributors might be editorial information or something like that, a version, again like the edition of a book, the number, often if articles are published in periodicals, for example, that will have a number or like an issue number. The publisher, we're almost always going to know publication date, and the location. So once we figure out kind of like what each of these terms mean, we can, as I said before, build almost a citation for almost any kind of source that we might be drawing from without having to find it in this exhaustive list of examples that have been prepared by the MLA guidelines or whatever. And the other thing to keep in mind is that of this basic list here, if there are things that don't apply to the source that we're trying to create, like we might not have a number for a short story from our book because it's not a periodical, it's not a magazine with an edition or an issue number, then we just skip that and we move on to the next thing. But obviously we're going to have a publisher, a date, a location, and now we just need to figure out where to find those things. Okay. So we're back to our e-text here. So we're going to want to go into the, we can start with the table of contents or pretty much click anywhere into the book. So we're into the actual right material here. So let's say we wanted to cite something like Raymond Carver's Cathedral, a short story from this textbook. So it's a work within this larger work, so now we have to figure out what's the author, what's the title, what's that container piece, and some of that other information. So let's go back here. Okay, so author. We can probably figure that out fairly easily in this case because we know that Raymond Carver is the author of this particular short story. So that's easy enough to do. Now we want the title of the source. Okay. Well, it's the title of the short story. Okay, pretty good so far. Let's go back. The title of the container. So that's again that weirder language or maybe a slightly unfamiliar language, but it's still pretty straightforward. But we might want to go back to our title page here just to make sure we get the exact wording right. So it's the Norton Introduction to Literature, and then the next thing we'll be asked for is that version, so the shorter 12th edition. Notice that we don't need to indicate that this is a print version or this is an e-text version. We're not really concerned with that so much anymore because of the fluidity of how things exist online or in a hard copy. That's less of a concern for us. Okay, so we've got that part. So let's go back to our list. We got author, title of the short story, the container, that Norton Intro to Lit. There's no other contributors exactly. The version is that shorter 12th edition. There's really no number since it's not a journal or a magazine of some kind. The publisher we can again find in that same title page. Is W.W. Norton and Company, and if you're unsure about how the information on the title page is provided, you can always check that copyright page too, which will list all of this information. So we can find again the publisher, we can find the year of publication. In a case where you see a whole bunch listed like this one, we would just take the most recent. Publication date, and then location is something that we might include if there were like a URL that we needed or something like that. But again, not something that we necessarily need to include in our citation. So we're going to go back to our list here. I think we've got the basic pieces. And now we need to figure out how they're actually going to look, like where the commas go, the periods, what gets italicized, what goes in quotes, stuff like that. Okay, so in this case, what we're really citing is an example, or the examples we're looking at here are a chapter or article in an anthology or collection. So the short story in that bigger anthology. So we've got our author name we discovered. So we're going to do last name, comma, first name. So it might be Carver, comma, Raymond. We know the title of the short story is going to be Cathedral. Notice that it goes in quotation marks. The title of the collection, or the container, as it's called, is going to be, again, that Norton Introduction to Literature. And then we would like to say the shorter 12th edition, or, again, even if the edition changes, since we know what piece we want, we would just fill that piece in. So once we learn the format or the basic idea here, we can begin plugging in information from lots of different kinds of sources. Edited by, and here we're going to want the editor's names. So that's again where we might go back to our title page. So Kelly J. Mays is the editor of this particular book. So she didn't obviously write all the short stories and stuff, but if there's a little introduction to a short story, for example, or a discussion of an author's biography, that was probably written by her. So we wouldn't usually cite her as an author that we'd quote from our textbook, since we're normally quoting the actual short story or poem or play. But we, of course, want to acknowledge her work as the editor for this particular book. So she's going to be the editor. The publisher, we looked at already, is W.W. Norton. The year, again, even if you're given a string of years, we're just going to take the most recent, so 2016 that might be for us. The page range, which we'll get from either our text version or e-version, whatever it happens to be. And so we would just look, in this case, at the page numbering here from the very start all the way down to the very end. So it looks like about page 42 is where that ends. So notice that again, we're looking at this as if it's a website or an e-text, which it is, but we're not really treating it any differently than if we had the book open in front of us. We'd still look for page numbers, all of those titles, author name, editor name, title of the book, all of that stays the same. So despite all of the various like pieces you've got to put together, the new MLA system really kind of simplifies things a little bit. Okay, so we're back to our anthology. The title of the website, again, it's not really a website, even though, right, we are sort of looking at it on the web, but we could really end our entry for a short story or poem or something from our textbook, our anthology, pretty much right here. So as long as we've got these pieces, the rest of it is not really relevant for what we're looking at.